Welcome back. Kim here at mHUB. Today we're in the shop with both Quinn and David to talk about different finishing methods for both plastic and metal. So we're taking two objects, this plastic 3D printed rose and this metal laser cut rose, and we're painting the roses red. The plan is to test different finishing techniques to see how they impact appearance depending on material and process. The processes include dyeing, which will work only on this plastic material, powder coating, and spray coating techniques ranging from common to professional. So let's get testing. So I'm with David. Hi, David.
How's it going?
Pretty good. We're at the spray booth, and we're gonna start with a quick and dirty method to kick things off.
Yeah.
Tell us what we're gonna do.
For sure. So the fastest way to change the color or get a coating on a part is just throw some spray paint on it. So today we're gonna be spray painting this 3D printed rose, or half of a 3D printed rose, and this nice little metal rose. Before we can spray paint any metal, we wanna get any kind of oil or rust or dust off of it. So we're just gonna go ahead and slap it into the sandblaster right over there. So we're gonna run and do that real quick. Not bad. You can see that the surface is a little rougher, so it'll be a little easier for the spray paint to adhere to our part. There you go.
Although I'm gonna get more oil on it now, which you just took off.
And it should be fine. We're going for the quick method here. All right, back at the spray booth here. Now we're just gonna go ahead and quickly paint these. So we got both of our parts here. Shake up our nice can of spray paint. Be sure to turn on the ventilation here and just spray back and forth here. There we have it. We'll let it dry.
So that looks fairly saturated, pretty red.
Yep. Yeah, that's probably a bit more spray than I wanted on there, but I wanted to do it in one coat, so good enough.
Great. So while that was fascinating, literally watching paint dry, I hear you have a custom method, a little bit more intricate and involved.
So there are definitely some more advanced coatings we can put on 3D printed or metal parts. The one we're going to talk about next is Cerakote, which is a ceramic coating that is a very, very thin coating. So this has a problem where, now I've made my part a little thicker by painting it. So the Cerakote, unfortunately, it does not increase the thickness by much, so pieces will still fit together. So yeah, let's talk about doing that.
Show us how to do it.
All right, now that we've finished our spray painting here, we're gonna go with a little bit more of an advanced process. So this is a Cerakote process. The advantages with coating parts with Cerakote is that it will make them more waterproof, as well as, of course, give you the color you want. But one of the biggest things is that the coating is a very thin coating when applied correctly. So that allows parts to still fit together. You can spray metal parts, 3D printed parts, whatever you need to, and it bakes at a very low temperature, so you're not gonna risk damaging your parts by curing the Cerakote onto your part. So what we're gonna do to start that process is basically we need to mix up the paint or the coating that we're gonna make today. So today we're gonna be using the red because we're painting a rose. And there's two parts to it. There is the catalyst and the actual coating itself. So we basically mix these at like a 12 or 15 to 1 ratio, which we will do in here. And then we're gonna go ahead and set up our little spray gun and spray the part itself in the spray booth back here. I will be wearing a respirator while doing that because it is a solvent process. So that's why I'm talking through it now. Shall we jump into it? All right, now that we have our mixture in our spray gun here, we're just gonna go ahead and spray it on our part. All right. right, so now that we have finished spraying our parts and placed them in the oven here, we're gonna go ahead and set our oven to 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And then we're gonna go ahead and set that for 2 hours, come back, and we will have some Cerakoted parts here. All right, see you soon.
Quinn's joined us.
Back
Welcome, Quinn. So David Cerakote rose, both the 3D and the metal laser cut rose, is in the oven baking for 2 hours. The other method that he showed us was a more quick and dirty, just back and forth spray paint. But we have one more spray category finish that Quinn's gonna show us.
So I'm going to show you a little bit more of an in-depth process for getting the most longevity out of your spray painting as possible. So we're going to do a little more prep and a little more finishing after applying the color, and that will just make it last longer, essentially.
Great. And then at the end, we'll look at all three and compare them, and we'll talk a little bit more about the differences. But Quinn, show us what you got.
All right, so let's get to it. So we are going to start doing our professional process, allowing for a little bit more longevity on our painting and our coating of these two roses. So we have our plastic 3D printed SLS nylon 12 rose and our metal. David hit that with a quick coat, just let it be as it was. You get some nice color on it. The longevity might not be there. So what we're gonna do is a little bit more prep and a few more stages. So we're going to sandblast the metal just to free it of any rust, anything like that. Make sure that the 3D printed one doesn't have any dust or anything, so we're gonna hit up some air. The first step that's a little bit different from David's is we're gonna hit it with a primer. I prefer to use a sandable primer. What that means is it's a base coat for the paint to adhere to a little better, and that primer adheres to the substrate a little bit better than just a paint on its own. The sandable nature of it allows you to polish it between layers if you need to. Today we're not going to do that. It's not really necessary with these particular objects. Then we'll follow it up with our paint, so that the color of whatever that we want for the roses, and then finally a clear coat that's going to protect our color, allow for a little bit more longevity, protect it from some UV, and just keep the color more vibrant for longer, essentially. So let's get to it. So we've done our cleaning, we've done our primer. If you notice during primer, there was a couple of layers there. Best technique for painting is always to use light coats. Always give yourself a little clearance of the nozzle, and you should always start your spray outside of your part. That way, if there's any clog, any splatter, it doesn't hit your part, but it'll be outside. Always follow the instructions on whatever paint you're using. It says a couple minutes between layers, maybe an hour between layers, whatever it is, just follow. They know best, it's their material. So let's add some color to these roses. Clear coat for that is done. We're going to do a recap at the end of all the different techniques we've used, the pros and cons and things of that nature. So stay tuned to the end. What we're going to talk about now is powder coating. Powder coating is the process of applying an atomized powder, in this case a prismatic powder, to your substrate, typically within a static adhesion, and then baking that coating on. Benefits of powder coating is that it's extremely durable, temperature resistant, abrasion resistant, all that kind of stuff. Normally it's only going to be available for things that can stand pretty high temperatures to start with, because you do have to stick it in an oven at about 400 degrees, and stuff that is electrically conductive, because you are statically clinging that powder to your substrate. So the metal rose, not a problem, pretty standard. We'll go through that. The plastic rose, on the other hand, we decided to do a little bit of experimenting. We've never had a great technique for finishing our 3D printed parts. This is done on our EOS nylon 12 printer. Because it's a little bit porous, colors don't pop all that much on it. You've seen painting, and that works fairly well. That's kind of arduous. So we said, why not do a powder coat? Powder coat's gonna sit on the top. We talked to Prismatic Powders to see if they had some material, some of their powders that actually were within the range. So we're actually gonna bake this at 320, which is fairly low for powders, but it is totally acceptable for the nylon. Tested a bunch, melted a couple of parts, worked out fairly well. So let's go through that process. So now we're talking about the steps of powder coating. These materials have already been prepped. The plastic rose has been blown out free of any dust. The metal has been sandblasted and wiped down with alcohol, so it's free of any oils. The process of powder coating, as I mentioned, is typically statically clinging a powder to the substrate of the metal with a gun and a grounding clip that then the circuit is completed when you pull a little trigger like so. You can see that there is a number of volts traveling through that. So when I spray, all of the charged particles here are gonna wanna cling specifically to the area that is charged opposite of these particles. That works great for conductive surfaces and materials. It's gonna be a little bit of a different process for the plastic rose. We're gonna have to do a technique called a hot spray. Since this is non-conductive, I'll have to heat this up to a temperature where the plastic or the powder in the gun was gonna wanna stick to the surface of our material, in this case the rose, so that then I can stick it back in the oven and have that reflow, so that the powder actually flows over the material in a nice even coating. Because it's a hot coat, maybe all of it won't stick the first time, and it might have to be 2 or 3 processes or 2 or 3 applications to get it perfectly applied across the whole substrate. So we're gonna turn on the oven, let this preheat, and then I'm gonna coat both of them together.
So we just left Quinn in the finishing lab to finish up powder coating of the 3D printed and the metal laser cut roses. And this is our very last method before we spread everything out and see what the different methods did for appearance. We're dying, and this is something we can only do on the plastic, right?
Yep, we're dying, but we won't be dead. But yes, this only works on plastic. So what we're gonna be doing here is we're gonna be just using standard like RIT fabric dye for nylon fabrics. And it does a fantastic job of dyeing nylon 3D printed parts. So what I've found seems to be the easiest method is actually using one of these deep fryers to heat up the water and dye mixture rather than, most people just use, like a pot or an old pan or something. But this is nice because you don't have to use your stove, and you also don't have to dirty one of your nice pans because the dye kind of stains whatever you put it in.
How hot is this?
So this is going to be just below boiling, so we're at about 200 degrees. If we get too hot, it'll actually start to warp the parts, so we want to try and get up to boiling, but not quite there. Now I already have a couple, two whole things of dye in here. So we're just gonna add one more to get the color we want. Just like that. Cool. Another great thing about dyeing is that you can dye a bunch of parts at one time. You don't have to worry about trying to spray them evenly, and you just kind of throw them in and wait. The nice thing is about this is we also have a basket, so that's something you would normally have to make for yourself if you're using a pot, but this comes with a basket. Then I just have this little piece of mesh that I cut out just to hold the parts down because nylon does in fact float. So we're just gonna throw that in there, make sure that the heater's running. It's already pretty close to temperature. And then we're not gonna drop the basket. We're just gonna go ahead and set it in there. There we go. And our mesh keeps everything nicely underneath the water here, which is what we want.
How long do you soak it for, David?
So that all depends on how dark a color you want. Generally, it's anywhere from an hour to probably 4 hours, depending on how dark you want your part and how much dye you added to the water. This one we're gonna do for about 45 minutes, and then we'll come back, pull it out, and rinse it off, and then we'll be good to go.
And then we'll look at the full spread of everything.
Exactly.
Let's do that.
All right, let's go.
So we have our finished objects here, and we're gonna run through what everything is. Reminder, this is what we started with, the metal laser cut piece, and then a plastic 3D printed rose, and moved through a variety of processes. So this was just the common basic spray paint. This was the Cerakote method that David showed us. This was the more professional version of a common spray paint, and then this was powder coating on the metal. For the 3D printed rose, same thing. Common basic spray paint, Cerakote, more of a special process, the professional version of a spray paint. This is a more low temperature powder coat, and then this is the dye that we were only able to do on the 3D printed rose. So my initial reaction is the powder coating's way glossy.
That would be a lot determined by the type of powder you use. So it wasn't a Pantone match, but yeah, it's that particular one has a fair bit of gloss to it.
Yeah, compared to something more matte like this. I know when we were talking, Quinn, you had mentioned that the Cerakote process is more like a powder coating process and less like the spray paint methods.
Yes, so you're gonna be attaching a granular substance. In this case, it's gonna be a ceramic versus a plastic, and flashing off the media for Cerakote, and then baking on and flowing over the plastic for the powder coating process.
Anything else special to note about the Cerakote?
I mean, again, it is the nice thing about it is it can be applied very thin. So that's one of the advantages of it. Is you can apply it very thin, so for the parts that are mating to each other, they will still very likely fit together after you've coated them. Where a powder coat gives you a bit of a thicker coating, you know, so you may not want to powder coat things that fit together. Yeah.
Sure. And in terms of the dye, I mean, to me, this looks like a very natural take on the rose color. And it's interesting because the dye can get into all the little crevices of the petals, the way other methods come in, which is nice.
Yeah, and the other big advantage of dyeing is, you know, you can, if you have multiple parts, you want to do a bunch of them all the same color at the same time, just put them in the same bath. So you don't have to worry about trying to spray around different things, and that effectively adds zero thickness to your part. So
as long as it's a permeable material. Yep.
So before we get a judge in to tell us what they think is best, let's talk about this object over here, because this is something that you made.
Yeah, so this was kind of, this was originally what we were gonna consider dyeing or painting or finishing in general. This thing here, this is actually a 3D print of a scanned rose. So we actually used a CT scanner to scan this, create a 3D file of an actual rose that we had gotten from a flower store. So this has a crazy amount of detail to it. There is a little bit of a flaw though. If you notice, some of these petals here are actually doubled. And that's because when it was scanned, it actually moved ever so slightly as it wilted during the scanning process, because it took about an hour to scan and slowly leaned over a little bit. But you can see that, you know, with that CT scanning process, you can get just a crazy amount of detail. I'm happy we didn't paint this one because it would have been a real pain to get into all of those crevices. So
No kidding.
this might be the only one that you would just have to dye. Otherwise you would, you know, have a tough time with it. This is also
Cool.
a 2 gig STL file for anyone who knows how terrible that is. So just something to be aware of. But it is a cool process.
It is. All right, let's see what Francesca, our shop intern, likes best. Francesca! So Francesca actually made the design file for this aerial view of the rose in metal. So take a close look and tell us, with no bias, what speaks to you?
They all look so good.
Nice.
I like these two, how they look more natural. They look really good. Yeah. Of course, I'm biased towards my own, but I like this one a lot.
So you're into the Cerakote, I
Right.
think.
All
That's the Cerakote. David's custom special finish.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, I think we have our answer, and everyone at home probably has their own preference. But these are just some different finishing methods in the finishing lab at mHUB. And if you liked this, please subscribe, like, comment, and tell us what you want to see in the future. And we hope you join us next time. Thanks. Bye.